The first thing you noticed at Fort Halston Military Medical Center was the noise. Fluorescent lights hummed, monitors chirped in uneven rhythms, radios crackled with clipped call signs and coordinates. Somewhere down the hall, a coffee machine hissed and sputtered like it resented being awake this early. Boots struck the polished floor in a steady beat. Voices carried in bursts, orders, jokes, complaints. The sound never really stopped here, not even in the blue hour before dawn. Ava Mercer moved through it all without a word. She swiped her badge at the side door, shouldered it open, and stepped into the staff hallway just as the clock above the entrance flicked from 04:29 to 04:30. Her scrubs were plain and clean, a muted navy that swallowed light. Her hair was pulled back in a tight knot, dark blonde braided so tight it barely moved when she walked. On her left arm, from mid-bicep to just above the elbow, a thick rope of scar tissue climbed like something burned into her skin on purpose. Raised, uneven, a jagged, pale river against the tan of her forearm. She tugged her sleeve down a fraction, not to hide it completely, just enough so it did not catch the eye of every person she passed. A gurney squeaked around the corner as she stepped aside. A sleepy respiratory therapist muttered a thanks and kept pushing. Ava nodded once, no extra words. She never wasted them. At the nurse's station, the night shift was still anchored in place, propped against wheeled chairs and empty coffee cups. The air smelled like old espresso and hand sanitizer, a bitter mix that clung to the back of the throat. "Morning, Mercer," someone said without looking up from the charting screen. "Morning," she answered, voice quiet but clear. Her login screen blinked to life. She reviewed her assignment for the day, eyes scanning with a steady, practiced patience. Step-down unit first. Geriatric wing next. A couple of long-term rehab patients. No surprises, no mercy from the scheduling software either. In the middle of the hovered complaining and the heavy-lidded yawns, she was strangely still. Not frozen, not stiff, just controlled as if every movement had been measured ahead of time. Behind her, the break room door was propped open with a gray rubber doorstop. The coffee machine on the far counter spat steam and frustration while a pair of younger nurses laughed at something on a phone screen. Their voices carried in small, bright bursts that did not match the dull light of the room. "I swear you can almost see it from here," one of them whispered. "That scar. Looks like somebody tried to sew her back together in the dark." "Kitchen accident," the other said, pouring dark coffee into a paper cup. "Or something stupid like that. No way it is combat." She would have told everyone already. They were not trying to be heard, but sound traveled easily in Fort Halston. Ava did not turn. Her shoulders did not flinch. She clicked to the next page of the patient list, fingers loose on the mouse. The hospital itself felt like a base in miniature. Flags in every hallway, motivational posters about readiness and resilience, framed photographs of soldiers in desert uniforms, lines of faces squinting into the sun. Outside, just beyond the parking lot, the low dark shape of the actual Army installation rose against the flat Texas horizon. On paper, Fort Halston Military Medical Center existed to serve those who served. In practice, it had its own internal chain of command, invisible and loud. Senior surgeons who spoke in full volume even when they did not need to, administrators who walked like they owned the floor, young officers who believed their rank covered gaps in their experience. Ava did not fit neatly anywhere in that hierarchy. She was not loud enough for the ones who thought volume equaled authority, not curious enough for the gossips, not broken enough for the ones who collected trauma like medals. She picked up her first tray of morning meds and started down the hallway. Her steps were unhurried but efficient soles of her shoes whispering against the waxed floor. The hall smelled faintly of bleach and something sweeter, the residue of night shift air freshener. In room 312, a retired sergeant major slept with the television flickering on mute. His chart called him Leonard Hayes, 76 congestive heart failure, post-surgical recovery. The whiteboard at his bedside said Len in loopy handwriting. Ava set the tray on the rolling table, adjusted the blinds so the early light did not hit his eyes, and checked the IV pump. Her fingers brushed his wrist, searching for the familiar thrum of his pulse. Steady, a touch slow. "Morning, Sergeant Major," she said softly. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening on her face. "You again?" he rasped. "You the only one who works around here?" "Feels that way sometimes," she said, a hint of humor passing across her features. "How is the pain today? Old as I am, if something is not hurting, I figure I'm dead." He tried to shift, then winced. She saw it before he did, the way his shoulder pressed against the too-stiff mattress, the angle of his hip, the tension in his jaw. She lowered the head of the bed by a few degrees, added a folded blanket under his knees, then slid her hand under his shoulder blade and gently pulled him a fraction of an inch higher. "Try that," she said. He closed his eyes, exhaled, and some of the tightness in his face melted. "Better," he admitted. She gave him his meds, watched until he swallowed them, then straightened the blankets with the unconscious precision of someone who had done the same motion 1,000 times in very different places. Back at the station, Dr. Cole Whitman leaned against the counter, white coat open, tie loosened. His hair was just messy enough to look intentional. He held a coffee cup in one hand, chart in the other, while he entertained a pair of new nurses with a story from residency. Out in San Diego, he was saying, we had this guy come in saying his dog bit him. One look and you could tell it was a kitchen knife. People always try to make their stories sound tougher than they are. His gaze slid past the nurses and settled on Ava as she logged another set of vitals into the system. His eyes flicked to her left arm, where her sleeve had ridden up just enough to show the top ridge of the scar. Kind of like that, he added. You see a scar like that 9 times out of 10, it is something stupid. Drunk cooking, bad boyfriend, not exactly Fallujah. The nurses laughed too loud for the early hour. One of them glanced at Ava, then quickly looked away when she realized the target might have heard. Ava finished her entry, clicked save, and closed the chart. She did not respond, did not look at Cole. Her face was unreadable, not carefully blank, but naturally calm. The only sign she had even registered the words was the tiniest pause as she pushed back from the desk. Mercer, the charge nurse called from the other end of the station. After you finish and step down, they need an extra pair of hands in rehab. You good with that? Yes, ma'am, Ava said. Her voice was even, no weight on the words. She picked up the next tray, checked the wristbands clipped to its edge, and started down the hall again, past the open door of the break room. The coffee machine let out another angry hiss. Someone laughed at a joke she could not hear the start of. The noise wrapped around her. Lights, beeps, footsteps, the shuffle of paper, the clatter of metal instruments hitting metal trays. Ava moved through it like she had always belonged to the quiet that sat underneath everything, the thin layer of stillness that only a few people ever noticed. By 6, the building had woken up. Day shift bled into night shift in the usual messy overlap. Clipboards changed hands. Report was given in quick, tired phrases. Vitals, labs, family drama, little pieces of other people's lives passed across the nurse's station like trading cards. In the break room, the coffee machine never stopped. Ava stepped in only long enough to refill her water bottle. The room was too small for the number of bodies pressed inside walls, stained with old tape marks and rubbed shoe scuffs. A bulletin board sagged under potluck sign upsheets and outdated flu shot posters. Lieutenant Brady Collins stood near the window uniform, pressed collar perfect, cup of coffee balanced in his hand. His rank bars caught the fluorescent light. His boots did not have a single scuff on them. He watched her from the corner of his eye as she crossed to the sink. The nurses had already found their places. One perched on the counter, one leaning against the fridge, another scrolling through her phone with the speed of someone avoiding any real conversation. Their voices dropped when Ava walked in. She twisted the tap, filled the bottle with cold water, and listened without appearing to. She was here before I got in, one nurse murmured. Lights off, just sitting at the station charting. Creep me out. Creepy is not the word, another answered. She never talks, just stares at the monitors like they're going to tell her secrets. Brady took a slow sip of coffee, eyes narrowing on the pale curve of scar visible where Ava's sleeve had ridden up again. Nurse Mercer, he said, straightening with a little theatrical flourish. You got a minute? She capped her bottle and turned. Yes, sir. He stepped in closer than he needed to blocking part of the doorway with his body. The scent of his aftershave floated under the bitter smell of coffee and the sharper tang of disinfectant. You know, in officer training, they give a whole lecture on professionalism and appearance, he began. First impressions, patient confidence, that sort of thing. The room went very quiet. Even the coffee machine seemed to pause. He nodded toward her arm. That scar of yours, he said lightly. It is a little distracting. Looks like somebody practiced sad suturing with a blindfold on. A soft, uncomfortable laugh rippled from the back of the room. Brady tilted his head, waiting for a reaction. Ava held his gaze. Her eyes were an undecided color, somewhere between gray and green, clear and calm. It does its job, she said. He lifted both brows. Its job? Keeping my arm attached, she replied. A few of the nurses snorted quickly, covering their mouths. Brady's smile thinned. I am just saying, he went on, voice dropping a shade cooler. Most people who have seen real trauma cannot wait to tell you about it. You, on the other hand, walk around here saying nothing. Makes people wonder what you actually know. There it was laid out between them, the accusation, the challenge. Ava did not look away. I am familiar with trauma, Lieutenant, she said quietly. More than enough. The softness of her tone took some of the sting out of the words, but not the meaning. Underneath there was something steady and heavy like bedrock under thin soil. Brady's throat worked, his ears flushed. He opened his mouth to volley another line and found none waiting. From the other side of the room, someone coughed. The coffee machine sputtered back to life. Ava stepped sideways, not touching him, and left the break room with her water bottle in hand. The door swung on its tired hinge and thumped closed behind her. The nurses immediately began to whisper. Did you see her face? She did not even blink. Brady stared at the closed door for a long second, jaw clenched, then dropped his empty cup into the trash hard enough to make it topple sideways. Coffee sloshed onto the floor. No one commented. Out in the hall, Ava let her shoulders drop a fraction. Her fingers tightened just long enough around the bottle to make the plastic creak. Then she relaxed again and walked on. Her next rounds took her through the long-term rehab wing. The air there felt different, heavier with the weight of effort and time. Parallel bars, wheelchairs, family photos taped to the walls, hand-drawn cards from children with unsteady letters, "Welcome home, Daddy." She paused at the doorway of a room where a young man in a hospital gown sat on the edge of his bed. Sneaker on one foot, brace on the other leg, his crutches leaning against the nightstand. He glared at the prosthetic below his right knee like it had personally insulted him. "Specialist Drew Carter," she said, checking his wristband. "How is the morning going?" He shrugged, shoulders tight. "I am still here." "That is one way to measure it, she answered. His eyes flicked to her arm, then away, a too-quick motion that did not escape her. The scar had that effect, a small gravity pulling certain gazes like metal. "You seen a lot of this?" he asked, nodding toward his leg without looking at it. "A fair amount," she said. "Some better days than others." He snorted. "You talk like you know what that feels like." She held his look for a long moment, then adjusted the strap of his brace with careful fingers. "Put your weight here," she said. "Not on the outside edge. It will feel wrong at first, but it will keep your hip from screaming at you tonight." He hesitated, then obeyed. He shifted, testing. A surprised breath escaped him when the pain did not bite quite as hard. "How did you know that?" he asked. She allowed a small smile. "You are not the first soldier I have seen try to walk through a wall." When she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "That scar," he said quickly, as if the words might vanish if he did not throw them out now. "It from here." Her hand hovered on the doorframe. For a second, the hum of the overhead light grew louder, a thin electric whine. "No," she said, somewhere a lot louder. She left before he could untangle that answer. On the medical floor again, Sergeant Logan Pike sat on his bed in a different kind of silence. The chart above his head held sterile facts of his life: 34 infantry, alcohol use disorder, uncontrolled hypertension. The man below it was thicker than those words, built with the solid weight of someone who had carried packs over rough ground for a long time. His eyes were bloodshot, jaw covered in rough stubble. The smell of yesterday's whiskey clung to his skin. Ava rolled his medication cart to the foot of the bed. "Morning, Sergeant Pike," she said. "I have your meds." He stared at her for several seconds, eyes sliding to the scar on her arm, then back to her face. "Do you people hand those out at orientation now?" he asked. "Matching scars to go with the scrubs?" "These are blood pressure and detox support," she replied, ignoring the bait. "It will be easier on your system if we stay on schedule." "Schedule," he repeated, voice thick. "What do you know about Schedule, Mercer? You are a low-grade civilian nurse. You read charts. You hand out cups." His words slurred around the edges, but his hand was steady as he swiped at the tray. The plastic cups tipped and scattered pills bouncing across the floor with small ticking sounds. One rolled under the bed, another disappeared under the chair. The cart rattled. One of the little paper medication packets burst and spilled chalky white powder across the tile. Conversation in the hall died, heads turned toward the open doorway. Logan's voice rose harsh and ugly. "Where is a real medic?" he demanded. "Somebody who has seen things burn, not somebody playing dress-up with a war story scar." Ava looked down at the ruined meds, then up at him. Her eyes were not cold. They were, if anything, deeply tired. "The worst wounds, Sergeant," she said, "are not always the ones anyone can see." He opened his mouth, then shut it again. For a moment, his anger deflated, leaving something rawer behind. He grabbed the sheet in his fists, knuckles whitening, staring at a point somewhere over her shoulder. She stepped all back from the mess. "I will reorder your meds," she told him. "You will still need to take them." Her tone carried no reproach, only information. She turned and left, leaving the scattered cups on the floor for the tech who came in behind her with a broom and a quiet shake of his head. Later, at the far end of the hall, Dr. Miguel Alvarez stood washing his hands at a stainless steel sink. The water ran hot over his fingers, steam clouding the lower edge of the mirror. Behind him in the reflection, he saw Ava as she passed, pushing a vitals cart. Her sleeve hitched up when she reached to adjust a monitor cable tangled around the bed rail. For a split second, the overhead light caught the scar on her arm just right. He had seen a lot of scars in his time. Jagged white tracks from shrapnel, polished lines from clean surgical cuts, the bubbly melted texture of old burns. This was something different. Raised islands of tissue interrupted by pits. A spread pattern he recognized not as a doctor first, but as someone who had once crouched behind a HESCO barrier while the world shook around him. Claymore his mind supplied. Face toward enemy. He shut off the water and watched the way Ava moved compact energy, no wasted motion. She checked the monitor, spoke low to the patient, wrote something down on the clipboard, and rolled the cart to the next room. Problem? The anesthetist asked as she came up beside him, following his line of sight. Alvarez wiped his hands on a towel. No, he said. Just trying to remember where I have seen that pattern before. He looked again at the empty stretch of hallway. It nagged at him the way an almost forgotten song did the melody of something violent and controlled, layered beneath the hum of Fort Halston's constant noise. By late morning, the hospital settled into its usual rhythm, a hectic choreography that still managed to feel familiar. Phones rang, wheels turned, doors opened and closed with soft clicks. Somewhere somebody laughed too loud at something that was not very funny. A code bell chimed on a different floor, rose in pitch, then fell silent again. Ava finished charting in the step-down unit and logged out of the terminal. Her fingers paused over the keyboard for a moment, then lifted. A small pause, as if she were listening for something only she could hear. Mercer, the charge nurse called. Rehab is covered. Can you float to geriatrics for a bit? They are short. Yes, ma'am. The geriatric wing was quieter, but not by much. The television volume was always a little too high. Game shows, news channels, old westerns. Plastic plants gathered dust in the corners. The air smelled like lotion old sheets and the faint chemical tang of cleaning supplies that had soaked into the walls over years. Ava stopped outside room 408 and checked the notes. Mr. Klein, 82, history of strokes, limited mobility, skin integrity issues. Inside, he lay half turned on his side, the rail of the bed pressed too close against his back. The blinds were half closed, leaving the room in a dim blur of gray and blue. A fly buzzed slowly against the glass, too tired to do anything but bump and drift. Mr. Klein, she said gently. He grunted something that might have been a greeting. She moved closer, gloved hands careful as she adjusted the sheet and rolled him a bit farther, giving his spine room. Her fingers ran along his heel, searching. The skin there was pale and thin mottled. The faintest purple shadow bloomed under the surface, no bigger than a thumbnail. She frowned. Has anyone checked this today? She asked. He blinked at her. Checked what? Your heel? She said. Does it hurt here? She pressed lightly. He sucked in a breath. There it is, he muttered. Figured that was just old bones. She peeled back the sock, fully inspected the area, then looked at the positioning of the pillows and the angle of his leg. It would have been easy to miss. On a busy round with monitors beeping and alarms going off, it would have stayed hidden until it opened. I am going to fix this, then, she told him. You do not need another thing to heal. He gave a small, weary laugh. You talk like you know something about that. She slid a foam heel protector under his ankle, relieving the pressure, then adjusted his leg so the weight shifted. When she finished, she wrote a clear note in his chart, flagging it for the wound. Care team circled it with a pen, then called the unit clerk to make sure it would not get lost in the shuffle. The work was not glamorous. It was small. It was 100 tiny decisions, like that taken or not taken, that decided how a patient's story would read in a week. Back at the geriatric nurses' station, a television above the counter was tuned to a national news channel. The sound was a little too loud, the anchor's serious voice running under everything else like a second layer of noise. Military sources report increased activity along the border training corridor, the anchor said. Live fire exercises and unnamed operations have raised local concerns. A grainy video showed helicopters moving across a dusty horizon, rotors cutting the sky. Dust rose in long trails behind armored vehicles. The footage looped while the anchor continued. Officials maintain that the operations pose no immediate risk to nearby communities. Someone snorted at that. Ava glanced up, eyes catching the image of the helicopters for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Her expression did not change, but something in her shoulders tightened, then eased. They are always out there playing, one of the older nurses commented, flipping through a stack of charts. Last thing we need is some training accident filling our beds. Training accidents mean overtime, another nurse replied. I have bills. Let them drive their trucks into each other. They laughed the easy, detached laughter of people who did not quite believe the images on the screen had anything to do with their hallway. Ava shifted her focus back to the orders in front of her. It was not the same border corridor she remembered. The dust looked different. The ratio of green to brown in the landscape was off. The vehicles had newer paint. The sound of rotors on television never did match the exact pitch that lived in the back of her skull. Still, the image lingered. She completed her tasks in geriatrics and was floated again this time to the general medical surgical floor. The transitions did not bother her. Work was work. Vitals were vitals. The human body broke in familiar ways, whether the cause was a bullet or a bad diet. At the med-surg station, Dr. Whitman leaned one hip against the desk, scrolling through his tablet. "Mercer," he said without looking up, "you are everywhere today." "Floating," she said. "Where do you need me?" He finally glanced at her eyes, skimming past her face to land again on the line of her scar. He did not bother to hide it anymore. Curiosity dressed up as casual scrutiny rested in his gaze. "There's a post-op in 516, he said. "Lap chole, surgeon is touchy about drains. Family is clingy, you know the type. Keep them from ringing the call bell every 4 minutes." "Yes, sir." He watched her for another second, as if expecting her to ask a question or offer some background on herself that would satisfy his hunger for story. She did not. In 516, a middle-aged woman named Joanne Navarro lay in bed with a laparoscopic surgery dressing on her abdomen and a drain line snaking into a bulb at her side. Her husband sat in a plastic chair, knees bouncing fingers, tapping a restless pattern on his thigh. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Navarro?" Ava asked, checking the site, her touch gentle. "Sore," she admitted. "Every time I breathe, I feel like they left something inside." "That is normal for today," Ava said. "I am going to check your drain and your incisions." She explained every motion before she made it, her voice low and even, letting the woman's husband see the steps. The clear bulb filled with a small amount of dark red fluid. She emptied it, measured it with careful eyes, and wrote the numbers down. "Is that a lot?" the husband asked. "It is within the range we expect," she answered. "If it changes, I will let your doctor know." "So you have done this a lot," Joanne said through a wince. "A fair number of times." "In the army?" the husband asked suddenly. His eyes had drifted to her scar. He looked up now, genuinely curious rather than mocking. Ava paused for half a second. She kept her gaze on the clamp she was adjusting. "I have worked in a few different places," she said. "Looks like something serious," he started. "Joey," Joanne cut in, tired but firm. "You do not have to ask her that." "It is fine," Ava said. She secured the line, taped it, and stepped back. "Call if your pain climbs, not just if you are uncomfortable," she told Joanne. "You do not have to tough it out." The husband opened his mouth again, maybe to apologize, maybe to push, but she was already moving toward the door, chart in hand. On her way back to the station, she passed a window at the end of the hall. The sky outside was harshly bright, the kind of Texas sun that flattened colors and bleached the edges of things. A gust of wind pushed dust across the parking lot, picking up discarded leaves and trash. Two dark specks moved in formation far off, nearly lost against the pale blue. Helicopters flying low. The overhead speaker crackled, then delivered a harmless announcement about visitor parking. For a second, the static sounded like radio chatter in her ears. She closed her eyes on a breath, opened them again, and kept walking. At lunch, she did not sit in the break room. She took her meal in the small, forgotten family consultation area near the chapel, where the lights were dimmed and the chairs were too soft and nobody came unless something had gone wrong. She ate quickly half a sandwich and a handful of chips out of a brown paper bag, a plastic fork tapping against the inside of a container of fruit. The room smelled faintly of old coffee and the ghost of somebody's perfume. On the wall, a framed photograph showed a younger Fort Halston before renovations with fewer wings and more open field. A group of hospital staff stood in front of the old entrance. White coats, scrubs, smiles that reached some eyes and slid past others. She studied it without really seeing faces, eyes going instead to the background. The line of trees, the angle of the old helipad, the way the sky looked. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, checked the hospital alert app. A routine system test notification scrolled across the screen. No real codes yet. No real alarms. She finished her lunch, threw the bag away, and straightened the chairs before she left, placing them back into their original positions. It was a small habit, the kind people picked up in places where order meant survival. Afternoon rounds blurred together. Blood sugars, blood pressures, dressing changes. A fall risk patient who kept forgetting he was a fall risk. A confused elderly woman who woke up from a nap, convinced she was late to pick up her children from school. "Your children have children now," Ava reminded her gently, redirecting her back into bed. "They are safe. You are safe." The woman blinked, tears in her eyes, then relaxed, the panic dissolving. By the time the clock crept toward 3, the air in Fort Halston felt thicker somehow. The air conditioning units hummed a little louder. The light through the high windows shifted from clear white to something more yellow. Dust motes visible in the beams. Down at the far nurses' station, a security officer leaned against the counter, chatting with the clerk. The small television behind them had switched to a local channel. A banner across the bottom of the screen read, "Border training escalates. Military says all under control." Footage of helicopters played again, closer this time. The camera shook as rotors thundered overhead. A reporter on scene talked about loud booms, closed roads, nervous residents. Ava walked past without stopping. Her eyes drifted toward the screen for an instant, then moved on to the next chart in her hand. The noise inside the hospital rolled on. The quiet underneath it stayed where it always had, waiting. By 4 p.m, the edges of the day had begun to fray. The white noise of the hospital did not change much in volume, but it shifted in tone. Voices sharpened, footsteps picked up a little speed. Even the phones seemed to ring with more insistence. Ava finished a set of blood pressure checks in MedSurg and returned to the station to log them. Her hands moved quickly over the keys. Systolic, diastolic, heart rate, oxygen saturation. Numbers simple and precise. Behind her, one of the techs leaned close to the unit clerk, eyes on the small television perched in the corner. "They shut down Highway 62, he said quietly. "Look at that." Ava did not turn at first. She finished the last entry, clicked save, and only then glanced up. On screen, a local reporter stood near a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The wind tugged at her hair and the microphone cable. Behind her, the sky was hazy with dust. Black shapes moved across it, small and insect-like at that distance. "Residents describe hearing a series of concussive booms early this afternoon," the reporter said. "Army officials insist these are part of scheduled training operations along the border corridor." The footage cut to a shaky phone video. A helicopter thundered low overhead blades, chopping the air, kicking up a brown wall of dust that rolled through a cluster of scrub trees. In the background, a child screamed, half scared, half excited. "I live 2 miles from there," the tech muttered. "Nobody told us about any schedule." The clerk shrugged, not taking her eyes from the screen. "They never do." Ava watched for a moment, taking in the angle of the helicopter, the way it banked the color of its paint. Dark, angular, Army, not Coast Guard. Smoke rose in the distance, a thin gray column against the washed-out sky. Her jaw tightened, then eased again. She looked back at the monitor in front of her. "Mercer," the charge nurse said, nudging a stack of pink slips toward her. "You are covering post-op vitals in PACU until they find their missing body." "Yes, ma'am." The post-anesthesia care unit was closer to the surgical wing, where the ceilings felt lower and the air smelled like betadine and stale adrenaline. Recovery bays lined both walls, each separated by a curtain. Monitors beeped in a layered rhythm, oxygen lines hissed softly. Ava slipped into the flow. Check airway, check breathing, check circulation. She adjusted nasal cannulas, reassured groggy patients. Translated anesthesiologist jargon for anxious family members waiting just outside the doors. In Bay 7, a young woman blinked against the overhead light, cheeks damp with leftover tears from a dream she could not quite remember. "I am here," Ava told her. "You did fine, surgery is done." "Did they get it?" the woman asked, voice thick. "The tumor." "Yes," Ava said. "Your surgeon was pleased." "Pleased?" the woman repeated as if trying the word on. She let her eyes close again, shoulders relaxing into the pillow. The hours ticked by in tiny increments measured by respirations and blood pressure readings. The hospital tried on normal as long as it could. Just after 5, the overhead speaker crackled. There was nothing unusual about that at first. The speaker crackled dozens of times a day. Diet orders, paging doctors, lost visitors being guided back to the right wing. This time the sound cut through everything. "Attention all units, Mal," the operator said. "Prepare for incoming trauma. Repeat, prepare for incoming trauma." The words were calm, but the cadence carried an edge. Ava lifted her head. Across the PACU, nurses froze for half a second, then resumed movement with a little extra speed. The announcement changed. Code yellow, multiple casualties inbound from training corridor. A murmur started low at first building, like the first roll of approaching thunder. "Training," someone said. "Sure." Ava moved to the nearest monitor, finished the set of vitals she had started, and signed off the chart. Her chest felt tighter, though her breathing stayed measured. The overhead speaker lit up again. "Update code yellow, upgraded to code black. Repeat code black. Mass casualty event." The words dropped into the room like stones. Silence followed, then a burst of activity. The charge nurse in PACU raised her voice, assigning tasks, diverting stable patients to other units, freeing up hands. "We are not primary on this," she said, "but they will be pulling from everywhere. Wrap what you can, hand off what you cannot." Ava felt the shift in the air. Code black meant more than busy. It meant everything would tilt for a while. Triage would drag people into new shapes, old patterns, sliding back into place. The hospital phone on the desk rang a harsh, shrill tone that cut through the noise. The charge nurse snatched it up, listened, then put her hand over the receiver. "Mercer," she called. "ER wants you, now." Ava nodded once and moved. The hallway between PACU and the emergency department felt shorter than usual. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright. She passed a cluster of visitors pressed into corners, eyes wide. Children held a little closer than necessary. At the far end, double doors marked "Emergency" stood open. The noise that rolled out was different from earlier in the day, louder and rougher, layered with the sound of gurney wheels moving in fast bursts. As Ava stepped through, the triage nurse at the desk pointed at her without breaking her conversation on the phone. Mercer, good. Gear up. Trauma bays 1 and 2. Yes, ma'am. She pulled on a fresh pair of gloves, tightened the ties on her mask, and grabbed a face shield from the stack. The smell hit her a second later, sharp and metallic. Blood-old sweat, a faint undernote of burnt something drifting in on the air from outside. Through the glass doors at the front, she could see the parking lot. Security had cordoned off the nearest row of spaces. Beyond that, the landing pad glowed in the fading light, its painted circle bright against the concrete. Far overhead, blades thumped. Staff crowded near the windows for a moment, drawn by the sound. A helicopter dropped into view, growing larger with each rotation of the rotors. It was darker than the ones in the news footage. Its body looked heavier. The silhouette was familiar to every soldier who had ever ridden in one. Black Hawk. Dust and grit swirled outward in a wide ring as it settled. The building vibrated, glass panels buzzing in their frames. The triage nurse snapped her fingers. Eyes here, she said sharply. When they hit this door, you move. People peeled away from the windows and back into their roles, and someone dragged extra stretchers out of storage. Another nurse checked the suction equipment. Respiratory therapy lined up intubation kit. The overhead speaker came alive once more, the operator's voice tighter now. All physicians and nurses trained in trauma response report to the emergency department immediately. Ava stepped into Trauma 1, flicked on the extra overhead light, and did a quick inventory by touch rather than sight. Airway cart stocked, chest tube trays ready, IV supplies lined up, crash cart charged. Her heart beat a little faster, but the rhythm was familiar. She had moved through rooms like this before, only the walls had been canvas and the lights had swung on cables under a different sky. In the hallway outside, the chief of staff barked instructions to a cluster of residents. Remember your triage colors, he reminded them. We treat the salvageable first. Do not get stuck on any one case. Move. Dr. Whitman appeared at Ava's shoulder, cheeks flushed, jaw set. Can you believe this? He said, half breathless, trying on bravado to cover the fear in his eyes. Of all days for a mass casualty. Ava glanced at him, then passed him to the doors. What do we know? She asked. Rumors, he said. Training exercise went sideways. Border unit took fire. Nobody is saying from who or what. He tried to sound detached. The way his fingers tugged at his sleeves told a different story. Outside, the helicopter finally settled, rotors still turning, the beat of them vibrating through the floor. Medics in flight helmets and dark coveralls spilled out, bent low against the wash of air, pushing stretchers toward the doors. The triage nurse spoke into her radio voice, clipped. First wave incoming. Stand by. The automatic doors groaned open. Hot air rushed in, carrying the smell of jet fuel and burned earth. For a second, the boundary between Fort Halston and the training corridor outside blurred. As the first stretcher crossed the threshold, the overhead speaker chimed again. The tone was different this time. A narrow, high-pitched note that signaled a direct call. Attention emergency department, the operator said. By request of inbound unit, locate Nurse Ava Mercer immediately. Repeat, Nurse Ava Mercer requested on the pad. Heads turned. The triage nurse looked over at her eyebrows lifting. Congratulations, she said. You have fans. Ava's face did not change. I will go see what they need, she said. She stripped off her gloves, pulled a fresh pair from the box, and stepped toward the doors, the helicopter's shadow flickering across the tile as another wave of rotors passed overhead. Heat hit her as soon as she stepped out of the sliding doors. The late afternoon sun pressed against the concrete, pulling the smell of oil and hot rubber out of the parking lot. The rotors of the Black Hawk tore at the air, flattening the grass along the edges of the pad, throwing dust and grit against her cheeks. Ava squinted one hand, lifting to steady the face shield against the gust. Her scrubs snapped against her legs. The noise was so loud it stopped being sound and turned into sensation, a physical vibration in her chest. A flight medic in dark green crouched near the open side door of the helicopter, one hand braced on the frame, the other waving her in. His helmet visor was down, face tinted behind the dark shield. Nurse Mercer, he shouted, his voice shredded by the wind. Ava nodded, stepping closer, head lowered against the blast. Yeah, he yelled. You, good. He ducked back inside, hauling at the straps of the first stretcher. The patient on it was young, too young. Uniform top cut open, chest wrapped in field dressing, soaked a deep, ugly red. His mouth sagged around the edge of an oxygen mask, eyes glassy. Gunshot to the chest, the medic barked. Need him on a vent as fast as you can. We sealed what we could in the air. Together they slid the stretcher down the ramp and onto the waiting gurney. Ava kept pace on the far side, her hand steady on the metal rail. The wheels rattled over the threshold as they hit the smoother hospital floor. Behind them, another figure appeared at the helicopter door, then another. The scene fractured into moving pieces. Stretcher, flight crew, security, hospital staff rushing forward with their own carts and equipment. Inside the automatic doors, the change in sound was jarring. The rotor roar faded to a muffled thrum replaced by shouting the ring of metal on metal, the sharp chime of monitors waking up as power cables snapped into place. Ava pushed the first stretcher toward Trauma 1. The patient's breathing gurgled wetly under the mask. "Thoracics on their way," someone called. "Get a chest x-ray stat." "No time," Ava said, voice raised just enough to be heard. "His airway first." She slipped around to the head of the bed as they locked the stretcher into position. The young man's eyes rolled whites prominent. His chest rose unevenly, one side lagging behind the other. "Bag him," she ordered, already reaching for the laryngoscope. "Prepare suction." Dr. Whitman stood at the foot of the bed, hands hovering, eyes fanning over the bloody dressings. "Do we know entry and exit?" he asked the flight medic. "Left anterior, no exit," the medic snapped back. "Collapsed lung, maybe more." Ava leaned over the head of the stretcher, sweeping the man's mouth with a gloved finger. Blood and saliva pooled at the back of his throat. The suction hose hissed as she cleared it. "Lights down," she said. "More on the airway." The overhead lamp brightened above the bed. The rest of the room dimmed a fraction, subtle, but enough. "On your next exhale, buddy," she murmured, mostly for herself. "Let me see." His chest shuddered. She slipped the blade in, angling carefully, jaw opening under her hand. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the rattle of the suction and the beep of the monitor. "Cords," she said. "I see them." The endotracheal tube slid home in one smooth motion. She secured it, nodded. "Ventilate." The respiratory therapist took over, squeezing the bag in steady compressions. The young man's chest lifted more evenly now. The monitor chimed approval in the form of a rising oxygen saturation number. Only then did she look up. "Find the source," she said. "He is not bleeding on my floor." Whitman swallowed, then snapped into motion, hands tearing aside soaked gauze fingers, probing around the wound as the flight medic updated him in clipped shorthand. Through the open curtain, the hallway looked like a corridor during a storm. Stretcher after stretcher rolled past, each shadowed by a cluster of bodies in uniform and scrubs. Voices overlapped. "GSW abdomen hypotensive." Tourniquet in place above knee. Shrapnel chest and neck, decreased breath sounds. The usual architecture of the emergency department had dissolved. No waiting room. No neat line of minor complaints. Every bed that could hold a body was occupied, and then some. Ava stepped out of Trauma 1 as soon as she was not needed at the airway. She pulled off her bloody gloves, threw them into the red bin, and grabbed a fresh pair from the wall. "Mercer," the triage nurse called, turning away from her station, which was a mess of stat orders and triage tags. "Bay 3, you have a chest and a leg coming at the same time." "On it!" Bay 3 was barely more than an alcove, but it held oxygen suction and a monitor. Right now it also held a thin, young private with a tourniquet cinched high on his thigh, his pant leg cut away to reveal a stump slick with blood and debris. He was shaking teeth, chattering as if the room were cold. "It is all right," Ava said, moving to his side. "What is your name?" "Rodriguez," he stammered. I cannot feel my foot." "You do not have a foot to feel anymore," she said, not unkindly. "Which means you are not going to bleed it away either. Tourniquet looks good." She checked the tension, her fingers sure on the strap. It was tight enough to blanch his skin, tight enough that the pulse below it was gone. The flight medic at his head rattled off vitals. Ava listened while her hands worked, running up his side, pressing gently at his abdomen, checking for any hidden damage. A second paramedic appeared at the curtain with another patient on a gurney, this one struggling to breathe, his chest rising in short, shallow pulls. "Where do you want him?" the paramedic asked, already knowing the answer. "Here," Ava said. "Slide him in. Rodriguez, you are going to hear me talk to somebody else. That does not mean I forgot about you." She stepped around, taking in the new patient. His nasal flare was pronounced collar of his uniform, dark with soot. He coughed a wet, rattling sound that left flecks of black on his lips. "Name?" she asked. "Jensen," he forced out. She set a hand on his sternum, feeling the rise and fall, listening with her stethoscope in rapid placements across his chest. "Diminished on the right," she said. "Get me a stat portable x-ray if anyone is free." "If anyone is free," the respiratory therapist repeated with a short, humorless breath. Ava weighed the seconds, the way his trachea had shifted slightly under her fingers, the way his veins stood out in his neck. "No," she corrected. "Forget the x-ray. Prep for decompression if we have to. Keep oxygen high. Sit him up." Her voice did not rise. She spoke as if reciting a list. That calm drew people in, gave them something to hold on to. In the main hall, someone shouted for more blood. The blood bank was already stretching orders. A cart of red units rattled past plastic bags, swaying like dark fruit. Dr. Alvarez appeared at Ava's shoulder, his eyes moving between her two patients. "What have you got?" he asked. "Left above knee amputation tourniquet at the right place. Still conscious pressure, borderline, but holding," she said. "And probable lung involvement on Jensen. Right side. Breath sounds poor, neck veins elevated. He is close." Alvarez bent to listen, his stethoscope duplicating her movements. When he straightened, there was no argument in his face. "Keep him on high flow," he said. "If he decompensates, we tap." A nurse leaned in from the hall. "We have 2 more incoming from the same bird," she said. "1 abdominal, 1 head wound. Level 1 and Level 2 priority." "Put the abdomen in trauma 2, Alvarez replied. "Head to CT as soon as they can fit him. Mercer, can you manage here for a minute?" "I am managing," she said. He gave a short nod and disappeared back into the stream. Time stretched and snapped in strange ways. Minutes passed like seconds, then lingered heavy and slow as a single monitor flatlined or spiked without warning. At some point, Brady arrived scrub top, already marked with blood that did not look like his. His hair stuck to his forehead, damp with sweat. He held a chest tube tray in shaking hands. "Where do I cut?" he asked, staring at the chest of a young corporal on the bed in front of him. The man gasped, each breath a wet drag. His skin had taken on a grayish tinge. Brady's eyes flicked to the man's ribs, to the tray, back to the wound. "I know it is second intercostal space mid-clavicular line," he said more to himself than to anyone else. "I just cannot feel it. There is too much swelling." His voice was too loud for the small space. The room seemed to tighten around his words. Ava glanced over as she passed the doorway, her hands full of more saline bags. She took in the scene with a fast sweep. The corpseman at the head of the bed holding an oxygen mask, the sweat on Brady's upper lip, the confused fear in the patient's eyes. "4th or 5th intercostal space at the anterior axillary line is safer," she said, not slowing, "but only if you are sure." He snapped his head toward her. "You are a nurse," he said. "I am the physician." "Then decide," she answered. "He is running out of time." She did not wait to see what he did. There was no room in her mind for bruised pride. Rodriguez needed more fluids. Jensen's oxygen saturation had dipped by 2 points. Someone out of sight had started chest compressions. In her peripheral vision, she saw Dr. Alvarez slide into the room, saw his hand close over Brady's on the scalpel, guiding, correcting with a quiet sentence that did not leave room for argument. Ava moved on, trading empty IV bags for full ones, tightening connections, checking identity bands. Her world narrowed to Pulse's breaths, the feel of warm skin under cool gloves. In Trauma 4, a lieutenant lay on his side, face ashy fingers fisted in the sheet, blood soaked the bandage over his abdomen. "They hit the convoy," he whispered when she leaned in. "Came out of nowhere. We were just doing a sweep." His hand twitched toward the air, as if reaching for a rifle that was no longer there. "What matters now," she said, pressing more gauze against the wound as the surgeon prepared to take him to the operating room, "is that you are here. Try to stay with me until they move you." His gaze slid to her face, caught there for a second, then dropped to her arm. The scar had been exposed again, sleeves shoved back in the rush. "You from out there?" he asked, words slurring from blood loss and medication. "You look like you have been out there." Ava did not answer. His eyes closed. The surgical team swept him away. The hours thickened. The sky outside the small, high windows shifted from bright to dull to a bruised gray. At some point, the overhead lights took over fully, their artificial glow settling onto the controlled chaos. By the time the first lull came, it did not feel like a lull at all. It felt like the space between waves. The gurneys stopped arriving in a constant line. The noise dropped from a roar to a strained murmur. Ava stood for a moment in the narrow gap between 2 bays, her back against cool tile. Her shoulders ached. A fine tremor ran along the inside of her arms. She could feel the ghost of the helicopter's vibration still humming in her bones. Across the hall, Dr. Alvarez watched her. He took in the way she had moved for the past 2 hours, always 3 steps ahead of what was asked. No hesitations, no wasted motions. The pace was not the frantic scramble of someone trying to keep up. It was the tight, focused tempo of someone who had danced this pattern in far worse conditions. "She is not following a protocol," he murmured to the anesthetist beside him. "She is writing one." The anesthetist followed his gaze, eyes widening slightly, as she watched Ava slip into yet another bay where a monitor had started to complain. The quiet under the noise was back, humming around Ava like a low current as she bent over a soldier whose blood pressure had just dropped, calling for more fluids, listening to a heart that still had a fight left in it. The lull cracked sooner than anyone wanted. A shout went up near the entrance, sharper than the rest. One more critical from the corridor. "Make room." Ava stepped away from the wall and moved toward the sound. Her legs felt heavy, but they obeyed. The floor under her shoes was tacky, in spots where bleach had not quite conquered blood. A gurney swung around the corner, pushed by 2 medics in dusty uniforms. One of them had a fresh streak of soot across his cheek helmet. Crooked eyes, wild and tired at once. "Abdominal GSW," he barked as they navigated the narrow space. "Started to crash in flight. We stabilized what we could." The soldier on the gurney looked young, though it was hard to tell under the grime and blood. His hair was matted to his forehead. His skin had a waxy sheen. Bandages wrapped his midsection, already stained through. "Bay 2 is clear," the triage nurse called. "Take him." Ava matched their pace, one hand on the side rail. The soldier's eyes fluttered, rolling back then, forcing themselves down again, as if he were dragging them through molasses. "Stay with us," one medic said. "Come on, Reed." They locked the gurney into place in Bay 2. The curtains swished around them, closing out part of the chaos. The name stuck in Ava's ear. "Reed?" she asked, moving to the head of the bed. "First name?" "Mason," the medic said. His voice had shifted into something closer to pleading. "CPL, Mason Reed, Charlie Company, 3rd Battalion." The words landed like stones on water. Ava's hands were already on Mason's shoulder, steadying him as she checked his airway. The faintest hint of recognition flashed across his face, gone almost before it formed. "Blood pressure in the toilet," a nurse called out, reading off the cuff. 70/40, heart rate 130. 2 more units of O-neg, Ava said. "Wide open. Draw type and cross if someone has a vein left." She leaned in her face above his. "Mason," she said, raising her voice just enough. "My name is Ava. You are at Fort Halston. You got hit in the abdomen. We are working on you." His eyes fought their way toward her voice. They focused, blurred, then snapped wider. For a second, everything else fell away. The noise, the lights, the smell. "You have got to be kidding me," he rasped. His lips were cracked. The words came out in a ragged whisper. The medic at his arm paused, startled. "Mason," Ava repeated. "You need to breathe for me. In, out." "Doc Mercer," he croaked. Her hand tightened on his shoulder. The medic looked from Mason to Ava, confusion on his face. "What did you say?" he asked. Mason's gaze locked on Ava, now seeing her fully. His pupils were a little too large. Pain and morphine held hands behind his eyes. "They told us you died," he said, voice climbing. "You are not real." His breath hitched, catching on the edge of panic. The monitor at his side responded with a flutter of increased beeps. Ava kept her voice even. "I am real enough," she said. "Slow it down. In through your nose, out through your mouth." He shook his head weakly, swallowing a grimace. "You are Doc Mercer," he insisted. "Ranger Mercer, Outpost Gray Line, Desert Ridge." The medic at his arm stopped taping an IV line, frozen. Outside the curtain, footsteps slowed. Sound bled in and out, pieces catching on the surge of Mason's words. "They said you were gone," he went on, words tumbling now. "Claymore took you. We watched them carry your tag to the memorial. You went back for Hayes. Everybody saw it. You were already out and you went back." His chest hitched. One hand lifted fingers, scraping at the air until Ava caught it and her own pinning it gently to the sheet. "Focus," she said. "You are here. You are on my table. That is what matters. Hold my hand, not your stomach. Let me do that part." He gripped her fingers with surprising strength, their gloves squeaking. The medic finally found his voice. "You know him?" he asked. Ava did not look away from Mason. "We have met," she said. It was not an answer, but it was not a lie. Outside, the curtain had shifted just enough that a gap formed near the edge. Through it, figures clustered, drawn in spite of themselves. Dr. Whitman stood closest, his hand still smudged with dry blood from another case. Behind him, Brady hovered, face pale under the sweat and grime. Logan leaned against the wall, 2 bays down, IV lines tangled around his arm, like snakes watching with hooded eyes. "She dragged Hayes out from the line," Mason said, words breaking apart as his breath grew shallow. "Captain Hayes was pinned, Claymore wired all over. They told us to fall back. She did not. She went back into it. You did." His eyes searched her face, pleading for confirmation that his memory had not fractured entirely. The medic swallowed audibly. "You took a Claymore?" he asked Ava, disbelief edging into respect. She adjusted the pressure on Mason's abdomen, feeling the firmness under the bandages. The surgeon needed to see him soon. "It was not the whole thing," she said. "Just enough. Enough to get thrown 10 meters and not come back," Mason muttered. "Except you did." His grip on her hand weakened. His lids drooped. Ava leaned closer. "Mason," she said. "Stay with me. Look at me." His gaze crawled back to her. "You died," he said. "We all thought you died. We had the ceremony. They played the flag song. Hayes could not even stand when they read your name." "Sounds like bad intel," she said. "Not the first time." There was a flicker of humor at the corner of her mouth. It did not change the set of her eyes. The surgeon pushed through the curtain, already wearing a cap mask hanging around his neck. "What have we got?" he demanded. "Abdominal gunshot," Ava said, shifting so he could see the bandages. "Hypotensive but responsive. 2 units in, tenderness across the lower quadrants. Likely bowel and vessel involvement." "Or now," the surgeon said. "We open him as soon as we get upstairs. Who is riding with us?" "Tech is on the way," a nurse answered. The surgeon looked down at Mason just as another spasm of pain twisted his face. "Corporal," the surgeon said, "you are going to surgery. We are going to look inside and fix what we can." "Fix what you have to," Mason mumbled. "Doc Mercer is here. She did not stay dead." The surgeon glanced at Ava, one brow lifting. There was a question there he did not voice. "We have him," Ava said. "Blood is running, vitals are up a little." She checked the monitor. The numbers were not good, but they were better than they had been. The OR team arrived with a transport stretcher. In the shuffle of straps and cables and shouted handoffs, Mason snapped awake again, fingers clutching at Ava's sleeve. "Do not go back out there," he said suddenly, the words hoarse, urgent. "You did your time. You saved us already." Ava looked down at his hand wrapped around the pale ridge of her scar. For a heartbeat, the ER dropped away, and something else pressed in on her. Heat. Smoke. The metallic tang of dust that had once been stone. "I am right here," she said. "That is enough for today. Your job is to wake up upstairs." He stared at her for one more long, confused second, then let go. The team wheeled him away, curtains swaying in their wake. The hallway seemed quieter when he was gone, though the monitors still beeped and people still called for supplies. The silence was in the eyes now, not in the sounds. Dr. Whitman stood where he had been when Mason started talking. His face had gone a shade lighter. His gaze tracked the curve of Ava's scar with new understanding. "Mercer," he began. She turned, pulled off her gloves, and dropped them into the bin. "We still have 6 criticals on this side," she said, "and 2 waiting for CT." It was not an answer to any unspoken apology, but it was an answer to everything else. Behind him, Brady cleared his throat. "You were a ranger?" he asked, voice smaller than usual. "Something like that," she said. He flinched at the lack of detail, as if punished by the plainness of it. Logan pushed off the wall. His IV pump beeped forgotten as he stepped closer. Expression caught somewhere between shame and awe. "You were at Greyline," he said quietly. "Everybody knows that story. They talk about this medic who went back into a mine lane. We thought it was some legend they made up for the speeches." Ava's eyes flicked to him, holding his for a moment. "Stories get taller the farther they travel," she said. "But that was you," he persisted. "You are her." Her gaze did not soften. "Right now," she said, "I am the nurse on this floor. So are you, in a way." He frowned. "You have a uniform on," she added. "Try acting like it." The words were not cruel. They landed with the weight of simple expectation. Logan swallowed, nodding once. "Yes, ma'am," he said. The ma'am was new. It hung in the air between them. At the nurse's station, the charge nurse pretended to be busy with a stack of papers while visibly listening. The tech who had joked about highway closures earlier stared openly, his mouth slightly open. Behind the glass wall of a small family waiting room, a pair of parents clutched each other's hands and watched Ava move from bay to bay, unaware of the specifics, but sensing the shift in the way staff parted around her. Dr. Alvarez stepped up beside Whitman, wiping his hands on a towel. He spoke low for Whitman's ears only. "You remember that scar you were making jokes about," he said. Whitman flinched again. Alvarez did not press. He did not need to. The truth had already done its work. Ava crossed to the supply cart, pulled out a new pair of gloves, and snapped them on. The motion was practiced, almost graceful. She checked the board, noted which rooms needed reassessment, then turned toward the next bay with that same steady walk she had had when she arrived at Fort Halston's doors in the half-light before dawn. Nothing in her posture had changed. Everything around her had. The next wave did not come in all at once. It slipped in sideways. For a few fragile minutes, the emergency department moved at a manageable clip. Orders were clarified, fluids were adjusted. One of the walking wounded complained loudly about a missing boot, and someone found him a mismatched pair from the supply closet. A tech mopped a wide streak of dried blood off the floor, the motion slow and methodical. The overhead lights hummed. The air smelled like bleach sweat and the metallic tang that clung to everything now. Ava checked Jensen again. His oxygen saturation had climbed back into a safer range. The lines in his forehead eased. "You are breathing better," she said, listening to his chest. "That is you doing the work, not us." He huffed a thin laugh. "Feels like my chest lost the argument," he answered, voice still raspy. "Arguments do not matter," she said. "Winning does." She wrote a quick note, spoke briefly with the respiratory therapist, then stepped out of the bay. Down at the far end of the corridor near the ambulance entrance, a murmur had started. It moved along the hallway faster than any stretcher, an invisible ripple. A security officer trotted past the nurse's station, straightening his vest with quick, nervous hands. "VIP inbound," he told the clerk. 3-star. The words hit ears that had already been stretched thin. Heads turned. "You have got to be kidding," someone muttered. The triage nurse set her pen down with a little more force than necessary. "Who is it?" she called. "Lieutenant General Howard Kane," the officer said. "Training Corridor Command." The name meant something, even to staff who did not follow chains of command. It carried weight, the kind measured in policy decisions and casualty lists. Near the main entrance, a small knot of senior staff formed, as if pulled by gravity. The chief of staff straightened his white coat. The hospital administrator adjusted his tie, though no one had asked for either of them. The siren outside was not loud. It yelped once a short wail, then cut off as the doors banged open. Paramedics came through first, pushing a gurney at a fast, controlled clip. The man strapped to it wore camouflage pants cut away at the thigh and a tan undershirt that had been sliced down the middle. His chest moved shallowly. A mask covered his mouth and nose. His skin had taken on the bad color, the washed-out gray-edged hue that meant something was stealing his air. Lines and tubes trailed after him. One paramedic squeezed an oxygen bag in sharp pumps. Another called out vitals. "Geriatric male, approximately early 60s, he shouted. "Crush injury to the chest from vehicle rollover, possible blast. Decreased breath sounds on the left. Neck veins distended, hypotensive. Suspected tension, pneumothorax." "That is not geriatric in this building," a nurse muttered under her breath. "Blood pressure," the chief of staff called, already pushing forward. 80/50 and dropping." They rolled him into the largest trauma bay, the one usually reserved for multi-system injuries. The room swallowed him, and the crowd that surged in after. Nurses, residents, a senior attending the chief, even the administrator hovering near the back like he might be useful for something. Ava moved with them, automatically checking his monitor as they locked the gurney into place. The heart rate flashing there was racing. His oxygen saturation dipped, climbed 1 point, as the paramedic bagged him harder, then dipped again. She stepped to the side, giving the resident a clear line to the head of the bed. "General Kane," the senior attending said loudly, leaning over him. "Sir, can you hear me?" The general's eyelids fluttered. His gaze slid around the room, not entirely focusing. Years in uniform sat in the lines around his mouth, in the tightness of his jaw. He strained against the mask, trying to breathe more deeply, failing. "Get that mask tight," the attending snapped. "I want an X-ray in here now." The paramedic shook his head. "Doctor, if we wait on X-ray, he is going to code," he said. "We saw it in the truck." He was compensating, then he started to drop. The attending set his jaw. "I am not needle decompressing a lieutenant general without a picture," he replied. "Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular, we miss, we hit the great vessels, we are done." The chief of staff shifted, anxiety etched across his face. "Maybe we should call thoracics down," he suggested. "They are in the OR," someone answered. "They are already scrubbed in." General Kane's chest rose again barely. His neck veins bulged. A faint, high-pitched sound crept into his breaths, air forcing itself through tighter and tighter spaces. Ava watched his chest. One side moved more than the other. Under her palm, when she placed it briefly on his ribs, she felt the resistance of trapped air fighting his lung. She had felt that before, in a different place, beneath different skin. "If we do not relieve that pressure," the paramedic insisted, "his heart will not be able to fill." The resident at the head of the bed looked from the general's face to the senior attending's hands. His eyes flicked to the stethoscope in his grip, then to the tray that held a large bore needle. His fingers trembled. "What are his SATs?" someone asked. 78 and falling. The air in the room thickened. The noise from the other bays seemed farther away. The attending pressed his fingers into the general's upper chest, searching for landmarks that did not want to be found under swollen tissue and contusions. His mouth pinched. "I cannot feel the second intercostal space," he snapped. "His chest wall is a mess. I am not guessing on a 3-star. The administrator hovered just behind him, face drawn. "If he dies in our ER," he started. "Then we did everything we could," the attending cut in, but the certainty in his tone had thinned. General Kane's hand twitched on the sheet. His eyes rolled toward Ava for a moment, not out of recognition, just searching for air in any direction. The monitor began to protest. A warning beep, then another faster. Ava felt the old sense rise inside her, the one that cut through rank and protocol and fear like a blade. The room shrank to a few essential elements. A chest that could not expand, a heart that was being squeezed, a needle untouched waiting. "Move," she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The attending turned his head toward her. "Nurse, this is not your procedure," he said. "You are not authorized to perform a needle thoracostomy on a field-grade officer. Stand down." There were too many titles in the room. Doctor, chief, general, administrator. The weight of them pressed against the walls. Ava stepped closer. She did not argue. She did not recite credentials or remind anyone of what she had done an hour ago or years before that. She shifted her shoulder, easing herself between the attending and the bed, dislodging him from the prime position without a single shove. Her fingers touched the general's side, not his upper chest. She counted ribs by feel, moving from one bony ridge to the next. Fourth intercostal space, mid-axillary line, lower where there was room to work and less risk of hitting what she did not intend to. "Mercer," the chief of staff said sharply. "There is no time," she answered, eyes on the field. "You can fire me later." She lifted the large bore needle from the tray. It felt heavier than it was weight, multiplied by the collective stare of the room. She steadied it with her right hand. Her left hand, the scarred one, spread across the general's ribs, anchoring him. His skin was warm under her palm. His heartbeat fluttered against her fingertips, a trapped thing. She visualized the path, skin to pleura, and nothing beyond that. No vessels, no bone, no rank. On exhale, she said quietly. The general's chest stuttered up, then sagged. She drove the needle in straight and sure. For a half second, there was resistance. Then the tip pushed through. The sound that followed cut through every other noise. A harsh, rushing hiss like a tire being punctured on purpose. Pressurized air erupted around the needle hub, carrying with it the stale heat that had been crushing his lung. The skin under her hand moved, the tightness easing. The monitor answered a beat later. The oxygen saturation number stopped falling. It paused, climbed 1 point, then another. General Kane's chest rose in a fuller, smoother arc. His eyes rolled open wider this time. The gray at the edge of his lips receded a shade. Someone in the room let out a breath they had been holding so long their ribs protested. Ava withdrew the needle just enough to slide the catheter in place, securing it quickly, taping it down with practiced strips. It was not elegant. It did not need to be. She stepped back, stripping off her gloves with a snap. The attending stared at the catheter, then at the monitor, then at her. The chief of staff ran a hand down his face. Vitals are stabilizing, a nurse reported, awe creeping into her voice. The administrator swallowed his Adam's apple, bobbing. Dr. Whitman hovered at the edge of the group, eyes fixed on the small plastic tube that had just made the difference between life and death. For a man whose name had been on command briefings for years. "You did that without a picture," he said. Ava looked at him. "I did not need a picture," she replied. "I had a patient." There was no boast in it, no challenge, just the plain reality of what had happened. Dr. Alvarez, who had stepped in halfway through the procedure and stopped himself from interfering, when he saw her hands exhaled through his nose, something like respect settling deeper on his features. He moved to the general's head, checking his pupils, listening to his chest with quick, efficient passes. "Air is moving better," he said. "We still need imaging, but he has time for it now." A nurse pushed a fresh mask over the general's face, securing it gently. He shuddered once, then settled breaths less shallow. His eyes found Ava again, less clouded. She gave him a small nod. "You are all right, sir," she said. "We have you." He did not answer. He did not need to. The crowd in the bay began to thin. One by one, people remembered they had other patients to see. The administrator backed out, smoothing his tie with hands that still trembled. The chief of staff clapped Dr. Alvarez on the shoulder, murmuring something about documentation and liability and how this would read in the inevitable report. Outside the room, the noise of the ER crept back in. A child cried in a distant corner, frightened by the unfamiliar sounds. A nurse laughed softly at a small joke, the sound brittle. Dr. Whitman stayed where he was for a few seconds more, watching Ava as she adjusted the general's blanket and checked the tape on the catheter. "Who taught you to do that?" he asked finally. She glanced at him. "The wrong side of a mountain," she said. He blinked. "Mountain," he repeated. She did not elaborate. She stepped away from the bed, washed her hands at the sink, scrubbing more carefully than usual. The hot water ran over her scar, turning it a more vivid pink. When she looked up, her eyes met Alvarez's in the mirror. "That was textbook," he said quietly. "Textbook combat medicine." Her reflection held his gaze for a beat. "Textbooks did not write it first," she said. He nodded once, as if that confirmed something he already knew. In the hallway, Brady watched her walk past his hands, empty now chest tube tray, abandoned on a side cart. He saw the way other nurses made room for her without thinking, the way medics from the flight crew tracked her with their eyes, a silent recognition passing between them. Logan stood near the wall, again IV pole in hand. As she passed, he straightened shoulders, squaring almost involuntarily. "Nice shot, ma'am," he said quietly. She did not smile, but her reply was not cold. "Nice to see you on your feet, Sergeant," she answered. He dipped his head, the gesture clumsy but sincere. The ER had taken on a different temperature. Fear had not evaporated, but it had backed off a few inches, pushed back by competence. Ava checked the board, noted which beds were marked as pending transfer, which needed labs drawn, which had families waiting outside. Her finger traced a quick path from one task to the next. At the end of the hall, the glass doors leading to the ambulance bay shuddered as another gust of hot air pushed against them. The sound of rotors had faded, replaced by the rumble of idling engines and the steady, stubborn heartbeat of the building itself. The overhead speaker crackled again. For a second, nothing came out, just static scratching at the edges of the already strained noise. A nurse glanced up, expecting another request for lab pickup or security to a random floor. The voice that followed sounded different, tighter, like the person at the other end was reading from something important. "Attention Fort Halston Medical Center," it said. "This is base operations. Confirm location of Staff Sergeant Ava Mercer." The words hung there, oddly placed in the air of an emergency department where everyone knew her as Nurse Mercer. A couple of heads turned toward her in reflex. She stood at the board, pen in hand, circling a room number that needed reassessment. The pen paused. The speaker resumed the words more urgent. Repeat, locate Staff Sergeant Ava Mercer, Priority 1. A tech near the station let out a low whistle. Staff Sergeant, he repeated. Guess we were missing a few lines from that resume. The charge nurse looked over at Ava. Apparently you belong to more than one of us, she said. Ava capped the pen. I am right here, she answered, her voice too quiet for the speaker, but loud enough for the unit clerk who grabbed the phone. This is the ER, the clerk said into the receiver. Mercer is here. What do you need from her? The reply was swallowed by the sound of a distant engine winding up outside. The clerk's eyes widened. Copy that, she said. She hung up and looked at Ava. Black Hawk coming back, not with patience, with an escort. There was a beat of silence as the meaning slid into place. An escort did not come for a nurse. An escort came for an asset. Outside engines rumbled deeper. The glass at the front of the department trembled as something heavy passed low overhead. The triage nurse stepped away from her desk. This day, she muttered. All right, people do not crowd the doors. We still have an ER to run. Curiosity pushed against that order but did not quite break it. Staff edged a little closer to the front, only to jerk back when the automatic doors opened, letting in a blast of hot air and the sound of rotors. Ava moved toward the entrance with the same measured pace she had used all day. Her shoulders were straight. Her scrubs were smudged, in places a faint spray of dried blood across one thigh. The scar on her arm caught the light when she reached to push the door open fully. Heat poured in heavy, with the smell of fuel and dust. Outside, the Black Hawk sat on the pad like a dark insect, rotors still spinning, but slower now, blades making lazy circles over the tarmac. 4 figures approached through the rotor wash silhouettes forming and sharpening as they stepped closer. They wore army uniforms in shades that did not match the fatigues of the medics. Their boots were clean in a way that said they had been in an office that morning, not a convoy. Their patches showed units that did not like to be discussed in full sentences. Joint Special Operations Command. Security moved instinctively to intercept, but the lead officer lifted a folder with a crisp motion. Whatever was inside it made the hospital guards step aside without argument. They entered the ER as if it were a briefing room. The air shifted around them. Conversations stumbled and fell silent. For a few seconds, all the monitors and ventilators and human voices blurred into the background. Their eyes scanned the room once, then locked onto Ava. The lead officer, a major with short-cropped dark hair and a jaw that had forgotten how to relax, stopped in front of her. On his chest above his name, the colored rectangle of his unit patch sat like a quiet threat. He took a breath, squared his shoulders, and did something nobody in that room expected. He saluted. The 3 behind him followed, arms snapping up in perfect unison. Palms face down, fingers tight, the line of their hands cutting the air. The ER froze. There was a difference between the half-casual salutes passed in hallways and this. This was precise, formal, meant. Ava stood still for a fraction of a second, then returned the salute with her scarred arm. Her movement was sharp and exact as if it had never left her muscle memory. Ma'am, the major said. His voice carried without needing volume. Major Ethan Ward, Joint Special Operations Command. We have orders from the Pentagon. Staff Sergeant Mercer, you are hereby relieved of all civilian duty. You are requested to return immediately to a critical advisory position. He did not read from a paper. He did not check the wording. He knew it by heart. Behind him, one of the captains flicked his gaze around the room. His eyes lingered on Dr. Whitman, on Brady, on Logan, with his IV pole on the nurses and techs clustered in loose knots. Some of those faces he had seen in other contexts. Briefings, reports, after-action reviews. None of them looked like they did in those rooms now. The charge nurse took a step forward, reflexive, protective. We are in the middle of a code black, she said. She is one of our best hands. Major Ward did not look at her. Ma'am, he repeated, still focused on Ava. We were told you were here. We were told you were working under a civilian contract. The order from higher is clear. Ava let her hand fall back to her side. Across the room, General Kane lay in his bay, the catheter in his chest, still ticking slowly, steadily with each breath. His monitor glowed with numbers that no longer screamed emergency, but did not yet promise safety. Ava's eyes went to him, then to the board that listed other critical patients. Mason Reed in surgery, Jensen in observation, Rodriguez in the OR getting his leg wound cleaned and stabilized. The names formed lines in her head. I am still responsible for patients, she said. The major blinked just once. Somewhere under the polished professionalism, understanding flickered. You are responsible for a lot more than that, ma'am, he answered. We have teams out there who do not know what they are doing without someone like you telling them. Command believes your place is back with them. He stopped himself from saying again. It hung there anyway. The chief of staff, who had hurried over when he saw the uniforms, finally found his voice. If this is a formal recall to active duty, he said, we will need documentation, transfer orders, release forms. She is under contract to this facility. Ward did not seem bothered. Paperwork is waiting, he said. We have signatures. We can brief your administration, but first, we secure Staff Sergeant Mercer. He said her rank with the clean precision of someone who had signed too many death notifications. Ava looked at him properly now, not as a messenger, but as a man she might have to tell no. How long? She asked. How long would I be gone? Ward hesitated. His eyes darted away for the first time toward the spinning rotors outside. I am not in a position to answer that, he said. I was told to say until the job is done. A humorless smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Of course, she said. A small crowd had formed at a respectful distance. Nurses, residents, techs, medics. They tried to look busy, but their eyes kept dragging back to the center of the scene. Logan's hands clenched around the grip of his IV pole. He had pushed himself a little closer without fully realizing it drawn forward by the words, critical advisory position. Dr. Whitman stood rigid as if any movement might make the moment more real. His face showed a mix of things. Shame, curiosity, something like awe, unwilling and late. General Kane's bay door was partially open. From his bed, he had a clear view of the uniformed officers and the nurse who had put a needle into his chest without hesitation. Mercer, the charge nurse said quietly, if you need to go, we will manage. Ava shook her head. No, she said. Not yet. She turned back to Ward. I require 15 minutes, she said. He frowned. Ma'am, with respect, this request came from the highest level. We are not exactly encouraged to negotiate. I am not negotiating, she replied. I am stating a condition. My patient is stable, not safe. General Kane stays in this hospital. I started his care. I complete what I can, then I walk out your door, not before. The major studied her. He looked at the general, at the catheter, at the monitor that had calmed because of her hand. He had read the file before he came, the one that had said, presumed killed in action, for years until a small quiet update had moved her name to a different list. The one that had held a summary paragraph about Outpost Greyline and a medic who had gone back for an officer pinned near a mine line. He took a breath. Understood, he said. 15 minutes. The captain behind him shifted, surprised. Ward did not look away from Ava. We will wait on the pad, he added. Chopper stays hot. A hint of a smile, almost invisible, crossed her face. Thank you, Major, she said. He and the others saluted again, shorter this time, more practical than ceremonial. Then they turned and walked back through the doors, their boots leaving clean prints on a floor that had seen too many others. As the doors slid shut, the ER exhaled. The charge nurse shook her head, a short, incredulous motion. Only you, she said to Ava, would tell a special operations major to wait. Ava did not answer. She moved back toward General Kane's bay, her steps picking up a little speed. Inside, the general watched her approach with clearer eyes. The mask fogged lightly with each breath. His hand twitched as if he meant to reach up, then settled. Looks like they found you. He managed, his voice muffled. Seems so, she said. She checked his pupil response, the sounds in his lungs, the position of the catheter. She adjusted the mask, smoothed the edge of the blanket, retaped a line that had started to peel. You saved my life, he said. We bought you time, she corrected. The rest is up to the surgeons and your stubbornness. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Command will not be pleased you kept them waiting, he said. I have kept worse things waiting, she replied. He watched her for a long moment. You are leaving then, he said. I am being asked to, she answered. I have not decided what that means yet. She finished her assessment, wrote quick notes on the chart, and stepped back. I will hand you over properly, she said. No loose ends. He exhaled the sound colder than the air from the mask. In war or in medicine, he said, that is more than most can promise. By the time she stepped back into the main hall, her 15 minutes had already been cut down by half. She used the rest of it. She went to Jensen, checked his oxygen again, made sure the order for his imaging had gone through. She stopped by Rodriguez's empty bay, confirmed with the OR desk that he had reached surgery and was still holding his own. She spoke to the nurse taking over Mason's post-operative care, emphasizing signs of internal bleeding to watch for. Everywhere she went, people looked at her differently. They made way in the hall without consciously doing it. They lowered their voices when she came within earshot, not out of fear, but out of a strange, newfound respect. Even the monitors seemed to quiet for her, though that was an illusion. Electronics did not care who you were. At the nurse's station, Dr. Whitman stood with a chart in his hands, not reading it. When she approached, he cleared his throat. Mercer, he said. She stopped waiting. I owe you an apology, he said. The words came out awkward, like they did not fit well in his mouth. You owe the patients better, she answered. Apologies are optional. He flinched, then nodded slowly. You gave us that chance, he said, to be better. Her expression did not change. Then do not waste it, she replied. He swallowed, then stepped aside, letting her pass. Logan was next, hovering near the edge of the station. He stood straighter than he had earlier, a V-pump and toe hospital gown tied properly in the back now. Ma'am, he said, About this morning. She cut him off with a small shake of her head. Your uniform is not a costume, Sergeant, she said. Wear it like it is not. His jaw worked. I am putting in for redeployment, he said. Combat zone. I want to earn it. The rank, the stories, all of it. Her eyes searched his, looking for something beyond the words. Then live in a way that honors the ones who did not make it back, she said. Let that be the measure. He nodded more firmly this time. Yes, ma'am, he said again. In the family waiting room, the parents who had watched her earlier rose as she passed. The mother grabbed her hand. Thank you, she said, voice trembling. They said our boy is in surgery because of you. He is in surgery because he is a fighter, Ava answered. I just helped him get to the door. The father nodded, eyes shiny. If you have to go, he said, go safe. She inclined her head, then slipped free. Her 15 minutes were nearly gone. The ER was still busy. It would be for hours, but the sharpest edge of the disaster had been blunted. The board no longer bled red ink across every line. Some rooms were marked stable. Others were labeled transferred. The worst of it had passed, leaving its mark. At the nurse's station, the charge nurse held out a folded document. Her fingers were tight around it. Your release packet, she said. Administration moved fast for once. Ava took it, glanced at the official wording and the signatures at the bottom. It stated in careful language that her contract was suspended, not terminated, that she had served with distinction during the incident, that Fort Halston would welcome her back if circumstances allowed. You have a position here, the charge nurse said. Remember that. I remember, Ava said. She set the packet down on the counter. For now, I still have a patient to check, she added. Which one? The charge nurse asked. She looked around at the faces. Staff, visitors, soldiers hunched on gurneys, families in chairs, exhausted techs leaning on carts. All of them, she said. Then she turned toward the doors leading to the landing pad, the Black Hawk's rotors still turning in the fading light. The glass doors sighed shut behind her. For a moment, Ava's reflection hovered there faint against the afternoon glare, then dissolved as she stepped out into the heat. Inside, the emergency department seemed to hold its breath. People stared in the direction she had gone, even after she disappeared from view. The only movement came from machines that did not care who walked where. Monitors kept beeping, IV pumps kept ticking, ventilators kept pushing air into lungs. Then the charge nurse clapped her hands, once the sound sharp in the charged air. All right, she said. Show is over. Back to work. The spell broke. Nurses turned back to their carts. Techs resumed their routes. The triage nurse returned to her desk, though her eyes flicked toward the doors every few seconds as if expecting Ava to stroll back in with another stretcher. Dr. Whitman stood for a long time with an untouched chart in his hand. The print on the page blurred around the edges. He read the same line twice before something in his brain caught up. Doctor, the clerk prompted gently. Room 12 is waiting on discharge orders. He blinked, refocused. Right, he said. Yes, discharge. His voice had lost its earlier brightness. The jokes he usually wore like armor had gone quiet, leaving something else exposed underneath. He walked down the hall to room 12, but the image that kept intruding was not the patient in front of him. It was Ava standing with one hand on a general's chest, a needle in her other hand, calm in a way he had never been in any crisis. In Bay 3, Jensen watched the movement outside his curtain oxygen cannula still hooked over his ears. He had heard some of what Mason had shouted earlier. Names. Grayline. Doc Mercer. He breathed slowly, counting the seconds in and the seconds out, anchoring himself to the steady whoosh in his ears. A nurse came in to check his vitals, her expression distracted. Did she really do all that? He asked. Who? The nurse said, then realized who he meant. Mercer looks like it. She does not talk about it, Jensen said. Maybe she did not need to, the nurse answered. Her tone was not judgmental. It was thoughtful. At the far end of the hall, Logan stood by the wall-mounted phone hospital gown, replaced with a set of sweatpants and a blue t-shirt someone from the supply closet had dug up for him. His IV port was capped now, a small plastic nub taped to his hand. He held the receiver between his shoulder and ear, filling out a form on a clipboard with his free hand. Yes, sir, he said into the phone. That is correct. Re-enlistment with preference for deployment. The voice on the other end said something he had expected. No, sir, he answered. This is not about chasing glory. This is about not wasting the uniform. His eyes followed a nurse pushing a linen cart. He watched as she paused at a doorway, adjusted a patient's pillow, smoothed the blanket in one practiced motion. The smallness of the gesture did not diminish it. He signed his name on the form, pressing hard enough to nearly tear the paper. In the staff lounge, the coffee machine hissed and gurgled, spitting out a thin stream of dark liquid into a waiting pot. Its noise filled the quiet between breaths. Two nurses stood by the counter, mugs in hand. They stared at the machine as if the right words might be brewed somewhere in the steam. I called it a kitchen scar, one of them said eventually. The admission came out soft. Me too, the other admitted. Or something like that. The first nurse traced the rim of her cup with a fingertip. She walked around here for weeks and never corrected us, she said. Would you have believed her? The second asked. They both knew the answer to that, not then. The door opened and Dr. Alvarez stepped in, heading for the sink. He washed his hands slowly, as if the action might rinse something more than blood and sanitizer from his skin. You two look like someone died, he said without turning. Someone almost did, one of the nurses replied. More than once. He dried his hands, glanced at them over his shoulder. That is true every day here, he said. Today you just saw what happens when someone remembers what the job is. He poured himself a small amount of coffee, tasted it, made a face, and added more powdered creamer than seemed necessary. When the next new nurse shows up with a scar, he added, maybe ask less stupid questions. They nodded, cheeks hot. In his office, the chief of staff sat behind his desk, tie-loosened white coat draped over the back of his chair instead of his shoulders. The blinds were half closed, turning the afternoon light into narrow bands. On his computer screen, a document glowed. Incident report, code black, names, times, interventions. He highlighted a line that read, needle thoracostomy performed in ER, and added, by Staff Sergeant and Ava Mercer, RN, former, Ranger, Medic, Outpost, Gray Line. His fingers hovered, then he deleted, former. He leaned back, rubbed his temples, and let his eyes drift to the framed certificates on his wall. Degrees, awards, commendations. None of them felt particularly heavy at the moment. His gaze slid to the corner of the room where a stack of unused plaques leaned against the wall from some long-ago awards ceremony. He pictured the break room, the coffee machine, the way staff had clustered there to talk about Mercer in the first week, the way they had looked at her today. He picked up the phone. Facilities, he said when someone answered. I need a small brass plate engraved and mounted. No name, just a sentence. He repeated it once, slowly listened, while the person on the other end wrote it down and confirmed the spelling. It goes in the staff lounge, he said, above the coffee machine. Make sure it is straight. He hung up and went back to his report. In the chapel off the main hall, a few families had gathered. Some lit candles. Others sat in the quiet, eyes closed, hands clasped. The chaplain moved among them, offering soft words. A young corporal in dress uniform sat alone in the back pew, his arm in a sling. He had been discharged from the ER hours earlier, but had not quite found himself able to leave the building. He stared at the stained glass window in front of him. The colors blurred not from any deep religious feeling, but from the simple fatigue of a day that had stretched too long. He thought about the woman in navy scrubs who had leaned over him as he bled on a stretcher, the way her voice had cut through the noise, the steadiness of her hand on his chest. He did not know her full story. He did not need to. He had seen enough. On the med-surg floor, Joanna Navarro shuffled slowly down the hallway with the help of a walker, her husband hovering on one side, a physical therapist on the other. She is leaving, Joanne asked, pausing to catch her breath. That is what they said, the therapist answered. Army called her back. Joanne shook her head. Should have known she was Army, she said. The way she talked. Like everything could be fixed if you just kept moving forward. Her husband smiled faintly. She made it sound like we could anyway, he said. Back in the ER, the rush had finally settled into something closer to a sustained push. New patients still came in, but they were regular emergencies again. Broken arms, chest pains, a kid who had stuck a marble up his nose. The staff moved as if they had all been nudged a few degrees off their previous course. They were not suddenly kinder. Not every snapped word was swallowed. Not every bad habit vanished. But when someone raised their voice without reason, it faded faster. When a new nurse stumbled on a procedure, the correction came with more instruction and less mockery. At the nurse's station, the television played muted news footage of the very corridor that had filled their bays that afternoon. The anchor's lips moved around words like incident and developing situation. No one turned the volume up. Dr. Whitman sat with a stack of charts, writing orders with fewer dramatic flourishes and more precision. Twice he caught himself about to make a joke at someone's expense, and let it die instead. He signed the last chart in the pile, then reached for another thinner folder. He hesitated, then pulled out a sticky note and wrote on it in neat block letters. Ask Alvarez about field protocols. He stuck it on the inside cover. If he was going to keep working here in a place that took in whatever the training corridor spat out, he needed to learn from someone who had seen more than textbooks offered. He needed to carve out some of the ignorance he had once protected with sarcasm. Outside, the sun slipped lower, streaking the sky with orange and red. The building's exterior glass reflected the landing pad, the helicopter, the small group of uniforms near it. Through the front windows, staff could see figures moving on the tarmac. A line of hospital personnel had formed without anyone calling for it. Security guards, orderlies, nurses on break, a few doctors. They gathered near the edge of the pad just far enough back to avoid the worst of the rotor wash. The charge nurse stood among them, arms folded, hair pulled back in a ponytail that whipped slightly in the wind. Logan was there too, one hand on his IV site, as if to protect it from the dust. Inside, those still on shift drifted toward the windows in ones and twos, drawn by the low thump of rotor blades starting to spin faster again. The ER did not stop. It could not. A bell rang in one of the bays, announcing a heart rate too high. Somewhere a baby cried. The printer spat out a new stack of lab results. But for a few seconds in between tasks, more than one set of eyes turned outward toward the tarmac, and the small, still figure in navy scrubs about to climb into the dark belly of a Blackhawk. Wind tugged at her clothes as she crossed the tarmac. The Blackhawk's rotors had picked up speed again, churning the air into hot, dusty currents that scraped at the throat. The sky above Fort Halston was streaked with late light, now orange and red, bleeding into a darker blue. A line of people stood just outside the safety cones that marked the edge of the pad. Security officers, orderlies, nurses with badges still clipped to their scrubs, a few doctors with stethoscopes around their necks. They were not in formation, but without quite meaning to, they straightened as she passed. Ava walked toward the helicopter, head bent slightly into the wind. Her scrubs whipped around her legs. Her badge clipped to her pocket, fluttered violently, then lay flat again. As she drew level with the cluster of staff, movement rippled through them. One by one, backs stiffened. Hands rose. Some saluted, instinct surfacing from old basic training. Others simply stood a little taller, eyes following her. Logan lifted his hand in a precise regulation salute. His IV site was taped over now, the skin around it slightly bruised. She returned the gesture with a small nod. The charge nurse caught her eye, lifted 2 fingers to her forehead in an informal acknowledgement that landed with more weight than a full salute might have. General Kane, propped slightly in his bed, in the trauma bay, watched through the wide observation window. The oxygen mask had been traded for a nasal cannula. The catheter still sat in his chest. He saw the line of staff, the helicopter, the woman in navy walking between. He lifted a hand in his own vague salute, fingers trembling. Ava reached the base of the ramp. The noise was almost physical here, rotors thundering overhead. Major Ward waited at the top, hand on the frame. "Ma'am," he called over the roar. "We are ready." She looked back once. From this angle, the hospital loomed large, all glass and concrete edges. Behind the reflective windows, she could see shapes, shadows of people leaning toward the glass. Faces she had worked alongside argued with stitched and steadied. For a second, the building felt less like a structure and more like a living thing that had taken a deep breath and held it. She gave it a final nod that no one inside could properly see, then climbed the ramp. Inside, the cabin smelled like hot metal oil and the lingering tang of cordite that clung to gear long after a firefight ended. Canvas bench seats lined the walls. Netting held gear in place. The floor was scored from boots and equipment. Ward slid the door shut behind her. The sound dampened the rotors, now a heavy drumbeat overhead instead of a raw assault. He gestured to a seat. "Strap in, ma'am," he said. She pulled the harness across her chest and locked it into place. The scar on her arm stood out pale against the strap. The other officers took their seats opposite. One captain avoided staring eyes flicking around the cabin instead. The other studied Ava openly, as if trying to reconcile the quiet nurse from the file with the person who had just held a general's life in her hands. The helicopter lifted a smooth rising motion that settled her stomach somewhere a few inches below where it belonged. Fort Halston dropped away beneath them. The pad shrank, the line of staff melted into a cluster of dark dots. The city stretched out in the distance, roads glinting like thin rivers of light in the beginning dusk. For a while, no one spoke. The thrum of the rotors filled the gaps. Eventually, Ward leaned forward, a little voice raised just enough to carry over the noise. "With respect, ma'am," he said, "you could have gone anywhere when they cleared you. You could have taken a staff slot in D.C., you could have taught at Bragg. You could have disappeared into some contractor job and made more money in a year than this hospital pays in 5. His eyes searched her face. "Why here?" he asked. "Why a place like Fort Halston?" She looked past him through the small oval window. The hospital was a square of light, now fading as they gained altitude. The highways curved through the darkening landscape, headlights blinking on one by one. "War taught me how to keep people alive," she said. Her voice was not loud, but the rotors seemed to recede a little around it. "This place taught me how to help them live after that," she went on. "Even when they do not think they want to, even when they pretend their worst wounds are somewhere nobody can see." Ward considered that. "Most people would not call an ER quiet," he said. "It is not," she replied. "On the surface." She tapped a finger lightly against the harness buckle. "But underneath," she added, "there is room for the kind of stillness we did not get out there. Between alarms, between bad news, you can hear yourself think if you are brave enough to listen." One of the captains across from her shifted. "You are a legend in some circles," he said, almost apologetic. "Stories about Greyline, about what you did for Hayes. Nobody expected the medic from those reports to wind up drawing blood in a hospital like this." She shrugged. Legend is a loud word, she said. I am not very loud. They let that sit for a while. The city lights thickened below them, clustering where neighborhoods compressed, thinning, where the land stretched open. Highways glowed slow, moving strings of red and white. The border training corridor was a dark smear beyond, dotted with the occasional floodlight. Ward glanced out the window, then back at her. They're going to want to put you in a room with screens and maps, he said. Ask you what you would have done in every scenario. Ask you how to keep the next set of names off the casualty lists. That is what the orders say, Jin, she answered. Is that what you want? He asked. She thought about the faces in the ER, Mason's hand gripping her sleeve, Jensen's careful breaths, Rodriguez insisting he could still feel a foot he no longer had, Logan's shame solidifying into resolve, Whitman's eyes when his certainty cracked. I want fewer medics standing where I stood today, she said. Trying to buy back seconds somebody wasted for them. If talking to people with maps helps that happen, I will talk. Ward nodded. Then we will get you in front of them, he said. He fell quiet. The others did too. For a few minutes, the only sound was the steady chop of the blades and the muted hiss of the headset radios as pilots spoke in a language of headings and altitudes. Ava leaned her head back against the padded wall, her eyes closed. The vibrations through the hull ran up her spine, familiar, in a way that felt almost like a memory of pain dulled now by time and distance. She let herself breathe slow and measured in time with the rise and fall of the cabin. Below Fort Halston continued its own rhythm. Days passed. The code black was written up, filed, dissected in meetings where administrators pointed at charts and argued over response times. Outside those rooms, it lived differently in the stories staff told each other at 2 a.m. when the hallways were empty and the coffee tasted like burnt rubber. In the staff lounge above the coffee machine, a new brass plaque appeared. It was small. The edges were smooth. The engraving was simple, the letters dark against the polished metal. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Nobody made an announcement about it. One morning it was simply there, catching the light, throwing a faint golden glow onto the stained tile wall. Nurses noticed it first. Did you see that? One asked, pointing with her mug. Yeah, another said. About time we hung something useful in here. Doctors noticed it too. Some read it and walked away. Others stood for a second longer than they meant to, then reached for the coffee pot with a different expression. Logan paused there, on his way back from a follow-up appointment, civilian clothes hanging a little looser on his frame. He read the words, lips moving silently, his jaw tightened. He lifted a hand to touch the dog tag under his shirt, then let it fall. In the ER, when a new nurse started a few weeks later, her hands nervous on the keyboard. The jokes were softer, fewer. When someone caught a glimpse of a scar on her neck, and curiosity flared, it burned out before it reached the surface. Instead, Alvarez showed her the trauma bay. You work fast, but you do not rush, he told her. If you do not know, ask. If someone is quiet, it does not mean they have nothing to teach you. On a slow afternoon, Dr. Whitman knocked on his office door. You said you would walk me through combat protocols, he reminded Alvarez. Alvarez raised an eyebrow. You sure you want to hear it? He asked. Whitman nodded. I am sure I do not want to be the guy who freezes with the chest tube in his hand again, he said. They closed the door and sat with a blank whiteboard between them. In room 312, Sergeant Major Hayes adjusted his blanket with a grunt. His picture on the bedside table showed him in uniform outside a dusty outpost whose name was not printed on the frame. He stared at it for a while, then looked out the window. He did not know that the medic who had pulled him away from the edge of a mine lane had walked those halls again. The charts did not say that. The staff did not tell him. But when a nurse came in and adjusted his pillows, just so easing the pressure off his bad hip without him asking, he felt something familiar in the care. He closed his eyes and let his breathing even out. At Fort Halston Military Medical Center, the noise went on. Monitors, radios, footsteps, coffee machines. Underneath it, a different rhythm had settled. Quieter, harder to measure. It moved in the way people paused before they spoke, in the way they watched each other work, in the split-second choices they made at bedsides and in hallways. On some evenings, when the wind was right, the distant thrum of helicopter blades drifted in over the parking lot. Heads would turn automatically. Eyes would search the sky. Most of the time, it was just another flight on some other mission. Still more than one person found themselves thinking for a brief, unspoken moment of a nurse with a scar on her arm and a steadiness in her voice, and of the quiet that had changed the way an entire building heard itself. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.